No tables. Get out.
6 tables are empty. We can see them.
Those tables are for humans, not for black trash off the street.
Say that again. Say it louder so everyone hears you.
Oh, you want louder? You stink. Everything about you disgusts me. Now crawl out before I put you out like the filthy animals you are.
You're gonna regret every word. Remember this moment.
What are you gonna do, cry?
Carter Thompson, Nora Thompson.
Then a woman at table 7 whispered their names, just their names. Gerald's laugh died. His face turned white, his body froze. He didn't know those names yet, but he was about to, and it would destroy him. Gerald Whitmore had been running the front of house at Levalmont for 6 years. In that time, he'd turned away dozens of people he decided didn't belong. It was clean, quiet. Nobody ever pushed back. Until the night he turned away the man who owned the building. But we'll get to that. Rewind 2 hours. A Saturday evening in late July, Charleston, South Carolina. The summer heat hadn't quit. It clung to the cobblestones and rose from the harbor and wrapped around the old buildings on King Street like something alive. Carter Thompson and his wife Nora walked arm in arm down the sidewalk, unhurried. They'd spent the day wandering through the historic district, the Battery, Rainbow Row, the old market where Nora bought a sweetgrass basket from a woman whose grandmother had woven them in the same spot 50 years ago. Carter carried the basket now, tucked under his free arm. He wore a navy polo, linen pants, and leather sandals. Nora had on a yellow sundress and flat sandals, a silk scarf loosely tied around her braids. They looked like any couple enjoying a long weekend. Comfortable, easy. 25 years of marriage had smoothed out the sharp edges and left behind something steady. "What about that place?" Nora pointed across the street.
Levalmont.
A French restaurant set inside a restored antebellum building with tall windows, white columns, and a wrought iron balcony draped in wisteria. The kind of place that whispered old money from every brick. "We don't have a reservation," Carter said. Nora smiled. "Since when has that stopped us?" He laughed. She was right. Half the best meals of their lives had been spontaneous. A street stall in Bangkok, a family kitchen in Tuscany, a seafood shack in Maine where the lobster came still snapping. They crossed the street and pushed through the heavy oak door. Inside, Levalmont was everything the exterior promised. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, white tablecloths glowed under candlelight. The clink of silverware mixed with low conversation and the soft notes of a piano playing somewhere in the back. It smelled of butter and wine and fresh bread. The dining room was maybe half full. 5 or 6 tables sat empty, their place settings untouched, napkins folded into perfect fans. Behind a mahogany podium near the entrance stood Gerald Whitmore, mid-40s, slim build, dark suit, slicked hair, a thin gold chain disappearing into his shirt collar. He had the kind of posture that suggested he believed the podium was a throne and the reservation book was his scepter. Gerald looked up as Carter and Nora approached. His eyes traveled, fast, practiced, from Carter's sandals to Nora's sundress to the sweetgrass basket tucked under Carter's arm. The smile he'd been wearing for the couple who'd just walked out vanished. Not all at once. It didn't crash, it simply receded, like a tide pulling back from shore, leaving behind something cold and flat. "Good evening," Carter said. "Table for 2, please." Gerald glanced down at his book, ran his finger along a page, looked up. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice carried the smooth, rehearsed regret of someone who wasn't sorry at all. "We have no tables available this evening." Behind him, the dining room stretched out wide and quiet. 5 empty tables. 6. White cloths gleaming under the chandeliers, place settings waiting for hands that hadn't arrived. Carter didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He'd already counted them on the way in. Nora's fingers tightened, just slightly, around his arm. Gerald didn't know it yet. Nobody in that dining room did. But the man he'd just turned away owned the ground beneath his feet. And within the hour, every person in Charleston with a phone would know exactly what happened at Le Valmont tonight. Carter kept his voice even. "Are you sure? It looks like there are a few open tables in the back." Gerald didn't blink. "Those are reserved, sir. We have a very busy evening ahead." He said "sir" the way some people say, "please leave." Technically polite, functionally a wall. Nora leaned in slightly. "We don't mind waiting. If something opens up, we'd love to stay." Gerald's jaw tightened. Just a flicker, gone before most people would catch it. But Carter caught it. 25 years in boardrooms had taught him to read the muscle before the mouth. "It could be a very long wait," Gerald said. He tilted his head, lowered his voice half a register. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the other establishments down the street. There are some excellent casual options nearby." The word casual did a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. A couple at a nearby table, mid-50s, pearls and blazer, finishing their appetizers, glanced over. The woman looked at Carter and Nora, then down at her plate. The man took a long sip of wine and studied the far wall with sudden fascination. Nobody said anything. That was the thing about moments like this. The silence did most of the work. Gerald didn't have to say what he meant. The empty tables said it for him. The averted eyes confirmed it. The whole room became a kind of quiet agreement. Not because everyone agreed, but because nobody disagreed out loud. A young waitress near the kitchen door, name tag reading Shelby, early 20s, auburn hair pulled back tight, watched the exchange from across the room. Her hands were full, a tray of bread baskets balanced on her shoulder. She slowed her step, her lips pressed together. She looked at Gerald the way an employee looks at a boss she's stopped respecting but hasn't figured out how to leave yet. Gerald reached beneath the podium and pressed something. Moments later, a broad-shouldered man in a dark polo appeared from the back hallway. Security. He didn't say anything. He just stood. 3 feet behind Gerald, arms crossed, eyes on Carter. The message was clear enough. Carter looked at the security guard, then back at Gerald. He said nothing, just breathed. And then the front door opened again. A couple walked in, white, late 30s. The man wore khaki shorts and a rumpled linen shirt, untucked. The woman had on a tank top and flip-flops. They were laughing about something, still finishing a conversation from outside. Gerald's entire body language shifted. His shoulders dropped, his chin lifted. The tight line of his mouth softened into a smile, warm, practiced, effortless. "Good evening! Welcome to Le Valmont." He stepped out from behind the podium, actually stepped out. "Table for 2? Right this way." He grabbed 2 leather-bound menus and walked them past Carter and Nora, close enough that Carter could smell his cologne, and led the couple straight to a window table. One of the tables that, 30 seconds ago, had been reserved. Gerald pulled out the woman's chair himself. The dining room murmured. A few heads turned. Someone at the bar coughed into their drink. Nora watched the whole thing. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp. Her face remained perfectly still, the way a lake goes still before a storm. Not from calm, but from everything pressing inward at once. She turned to Carter. Her voice was quiet, controlled, barely above a breath. "You saw that?" It wasn't a question. Carter nodded. "I saw it." Shelby saw it too. She stood frozen by the kitchen door, bread tray still on her shoulder, staring at Gerald with an expression that landed somewhere between disbelief and disgust. She'd worked here 11 months. She'd seen Gerald redirect guests before, the ones who didn't fit the ambiance, as he liked to put it. But she'd never seen it this blatant, this naked. She wanted to say something. She almost did. Her mouth opened. But then Gerald walked back toward the podium, and his eyes swept the room the way a lighthouse sweeps a coastline. Brief, mechanical, warning. Shelby closed her mouth, set the bread on table 12, and kept moving. Back at the podium, Gerald straightened his cuffs and looked at Carter and Nora as if they were a stain on his evening. "As I said," he repeated, "it could be quite a long wait." Carter held Gerald's gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough that Gerald's smile flickered, long enough that the security guard shifted his weight. Then Carter said simply, "That's fine. We'll wait." He placed his hand on the small of Nora's back and guided her to a bench near the window. They sat down. Nora crossed her ankles. Carter set the sweetgrass basket between them. They looked, to anyone walking past, like a couple with nowhere to be and all the time in the world. Gerald stared at them. He'd expected them to leave. They always left. That was the whole system. You don't say the thing, you imply the thing, and people remove themselves. It was clean, efficient, deniable. But Carter and Nora Thompson sat on that bench like they'd been planted there, like roots had come up through the floor and wrapped around their ankles. Gerald turned back to his podium, adjusted his book, straightened a pen, and for the first time that evening, a crack appeared in his composure. Carter Thompson didn't grow up in restaurants like Le Valmont. He grew up in a two-bedroom apartment in southwest Atlanta, in a neighborhood where the sidewalks cracked before the city got around to fixing them. His mother, Louise, taught third grade at a public school 6 blocks from their building. She earned just enough to keep the lights on and the fridge stocked, and not quite enough for anything else. But Louise Thompson had a rule. One she repeated so often it wore a groove into Carter's brain the way water wears a groove into stone. Nobody can give you your dignity, baby, and nobody can take it away. It's yours. It was always yours. Carter heard that voice now, sitting on this bench, 35 years and $1 billion later. He heard it clearly. The accent, the rhythm, the way she emphasized yours, like it was a deed to a house nobody could foreclose on. He looked at Nora. She was scrolling through something on her phone, a novel probably. She had a gift for stillness that most people mistook for passivity. But Carter knew better. Nora's calm wasn't retreat. It was a fortress. She'd built it brick by brick over a lifetime of moments exactly like this one. Gerald glanced at them from behind the podium every few minutes. Each glance carried more irritation than the last. They were supposed to be gone by now. Their presence on that bench was a disruption to the ecosystem he'd built, the one where discomfort was the product and silence was the customer's contribution. But the Thompsons didn't contribute. Nora looked up from her phone. "Remember that place in Savannah? The bed and breakfast?" Carter smiled. "The one where the owner told us they were fully booked, and then we saw her check in a family of 4 right after us?" "That's the one. You sent flowers to the B&B across the street, the one that took us in. They had better biscuits anyway." They laughed, softly, the kind of laugh that comes from a shared wound that's healed enough to press on without flinching. At table 4, an older man named Wallace Burke lowered his reading glasses and watched the Thompsons over the rim of his bourbon. Wallace was 71. He'd built a chain of 14 restaurants across the Southeast. Casual dining, comfort food, the kind of places where the host says your name when you walk in. He knew the hospitality business the way a surgeon knows anatomy, and what he was watching Gerald do was malpractice. Wallace shook his head, took a sip, said nothing. Not yet. Near the kitchen, Shelby loaded her tray with 2 glasses of ice water. She didn't ask anyone's permission. She carried them across the dining room, past the podium, past Gerald's line of sight, and set them down on the small table next to Carter and Nora's bench. "On the house," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. Nora looked up. "Thank you, sweetheart." "I'm sorry about—" Shelby started. Carter shook his head gently. "You have nothing to be sorry for." Shelby nodded, swallowed hard, went back to work. Gerald noticed the water glasses. His eyes narrowed. He made a mental note. Shelby would hear about that later. In his world, the hierarchy was simple. The podium decided who deserved service, and everyone else followed the podium's lead. The minutes ticked by. The piano player started a new piece, something by Debussy, soft and liquid. A waiter refilled wine glasses. A busboy cleared table 9. Nora set her phone down and rested her head on Carter's shoulder. "Some things never change," she said. Carter was quiet for a moment. He watched the candlelight flicker across the ceiling, watched a couple near the window toast to something, an anniversary maybe, or just a Tuesday. He thought about his mother, about the apartment in Atlanta, about every door that had closed in his face before he learned to buy the building. "No," he said, But we do. He took a sip of water, set the glass down, and waited. What Gerald didn't realize, what nobody in that dining room realized, was that Carter Thompson had spent his entire life turning closed doors into open ones. Not by kicking them down, by outlasting them. By standing still while the world rearranged itself around the simple, stubborn fact of his presence. Tonight would be no different. Table 7 sat near the back of the dining room, tucked against a wall of exposed brick. 2 women sat across from each other, sharing a bottle of Sancerre and a plate of seared scallops. One of them was Vivian Ashford. Vivian was 53, sharp-jawed, silver-streaked hair cut just above her shoulders. She'd been a senior editor at Forbes for 14 years. She'd profiled tech founders, hedge fund titans, oil barons, and a sitting vice president. She had the kind of memory that latched onto faces the way a camera latches onto light. One exposure was enough. She'd noticed the couple at the podium when they first walked in. She'd watched Gerald's smile disappear. She'd watched him redirect them to the bench. She'd watched the white couple in flip-flops get seated immediately after. She hadn't said anything, not because she didn't care, but because she was still putting the pieces together. Now she put them together. She set her fork down, slowly, like someone diffusing a wire. "Grace," she said to the woman across from her, "don't look right now. But that couple sitting on the bench by the window, do you see the man?" Grace Holloway, a literary agent from New York, glanced sideways. "The one with the basket?" "That's Carter Thompson." Grace blinked. "Carter Thompson, as in Thompson Capital, as in $4.2 billion, as in the man I spent 3 weeks interviewing for next month's cover story." Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a headline. "Top 50 philanthropists in America, built the largest minority-owned investment firm on the East Coast. That Carter Thompson." Grace set her wine glass down. "And they just told him there were no tables." They just told him there were no tables. The sentence hung between them like smoke. At the next table, a woman named Diane Prescott, wife of a local state senator, overheard just enough. Thompson and billionaire and no tables. She leaned toward her husband and repeated it. He pulled out his phone and Googled the name. His eyebrows climbed his forehead. Table by table, the information moved. Not loud, not dramatic. It traveled the way heat travels through metal, silently, steadily, until everything it touched was warm. A man at the bar typed something into his phone and showed it to the woman beside him. She covered her mouth. A couple near the piano exchanged a look, the kind of look that says, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" without a single word. Phones came out. Not to record. Not yet. Just to confirm. People needed to see the face on the screen and match it to the man on the bench. And when they did, when Carter Thompson's Wikipedia photo lined up with the man sitting 10 feet away holding a sweetgrass basket, the temperature in the room shifted. Wallace Burke didn't need Google. He'd seen Carter's face in Bloomberg Businessweek 2 months ago. He'd read about the Thompson Foundation's $100 million pledge to historically black colleges. He knew exactly who was sitting on that bench. Wallace stood up, straightened his jacket, walked across the dining room with the unhurried stride of a man who'd been waiting for the right moment and just found it. He stopped in front of Carter, extended his hand. "Mr. Thompson," he said, loud enough for Gerald to hear, loud enough for the tables nearby. "I'm Wallace Burke. It's an honor to meet you, sir." Carter looked up, shook the hand. "Mr. Burke, I've eaten at your restaurants, the one in Savannah. Best shrimp and grits south of heaven." Wallace smiled, but his eyes weren't smiling. They were aimed at Gerald. Then Vivian Ashford stood up. She crossed the room. Her heels clicked against the hardwood with the precision of a metronome. "Mr. Thompson," she said. "Vivian Ashford, Forbes. We spoke in April for the cover piece. It's wonderful to see you again." Nora smiled. "Vivian, you sent us the most beautiful note after the interview." "Your wife's foundation work deserved more pages than we gave it," Vivian said. Gerald watched this from behind the podium. His face had gone the color of old paper. His hand moved instinctively to his phone. He typed the name into the search bar. The screen filled with results. Carter Thompson, founder and CEO, Thompson Capital. Net worth, $4.2 billion. Forbes cover, forthcoming. Thompson Foundation, $100 million education pledge. Board member, 3 Fortune 500 companies. Gerald's thumb stopped scrolling. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. The phone trembled in his hand. He looked up at the man on the bench, the man in the navy polo and leather sandals, the man he'd turned away like a stain on his evening, and the ground beneath Gerald Whitmore's polished shoes turned to sand. Gerald moved fast. He came out from behind the podium with the urgency of a man trying to outrun a fire he'd started himself. "Mr. Thompson!" His voice cracked on the second syllable. He caught it, smoothed it out, forced a smile that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. I am so sorry. There seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding. We absolutely have a table for you, our best table, right by the window. Let me—" He reached for a menu. Carter didn't move. "A misunderstanding," Carter repeated. He said it slowly, tasted each syllable the way you'd taste something you weren't sure was spoiled yet. "Which part was the misunderstanding, Gerald?" Gerald's smile held, but just barely. The way a shelf holds when you put one too many books on it. You can see the sag, hear the creak, know it's only a matter of seconds. The tables. We have a complex reservation system, and sometimes— Was it a misunderstanding when you told us every table was reserved? Carter's voice was level, unhurried, each word placed with the precision of a chess piece. Or was it a misunderstanding when you seated that couple in flip-flops at the window table 30 seconds later? Gerald opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Nora stood up from the bench. She didn't say anything. She just stood, shoulders back, chin level, the yellow sundress catching the chandelier light. She looked at Gerald the way a teacher looks at a student who's been caught cheating and doesn't even have a good excuse prepared. Not angry, disappointed, which was infinitely worse. The dining room had gone quiet. Not the polite quiet of people lowering their voices. The heavy quiet. The kind that presses down on a room when everyone in it realizes they're inside a moment they'll be telling people about for years. The piano player had stopped mid-phrase, his fingers hovering above the keys like birds that had forgotten how to land. Forks rested on plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room had found its way to the podium. Vivian Ashford stood at her table, phone in hand, not hiding it, not apologizing for it. She was documenting this the way she documented everything, with the calm, surgical focus of someone who understood that what was happening right now was already a story, already a headline, already an opening paragraph. Wallace Burke remained standing where he'd been, arms crossed over his chest. His expression had settled into something granite hard. He'd fired 3 managers in his career for exactly this behavior. He knew what accountability looked like when it finally showed up, and he knew Gerald had never once been introduced to it. "Mr. Thompson, please," Gerald said. His voice had dropped to something thin and breakable. The performance was collapsing. "If you'll allow me to—" "I'll allow you to listen," Carter said. The room held its breath. "My wife and I walked into your restaurant tonight to celebrate 25 years of marriage. We were polite, we were patient, and you looked at us and decided, in about 3 seconds, that we didn't belong here." Carter paused. Let the silence work. "You didn't ask our name. You didn't check your system. You didn't offer us the bar or a waiting list. You looked at us and you made a decision based on what you saw. And we both know what you saw." Gerald's lower lip trembled. The security guard behind him had stepped back 2 full paces, quietly distancing himself from the wreckage the way a man steps away from a building he knows is about to come down. "Here's what you didn't see," Carter continued. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet was doing all the amplifying for him. "You didn't see that I own this building. This building, Gerald. Thompson Property Holdings. The lease for Le Valmont. I signed it. It renewed 8 months ago. Your rent check goes into an account with my name on it." A murmur rippled through the dining room. Someone at the bar whispered, "Oh my God." loud enough to carry across 4 tables. Gerald's face passed through several colors in quick succession. Red, white, then a shade of gray that didn't exist in nature. "You also didn't see," Carter said, "that the woman standing next to me, my wife, Nora, runs the Thompson Foundation. Last year, that foundation gave $100 million to education programs across 12 states. She's on the board of the Charleston Arts Council. She sits on the board of MUSC Children's Hospital. She's done more for this city in 1 fiscal quarter than this restaurant has done in its entire existence." Nora didn't add to that. She didn't need to. She stood beside Carter the way a cathedral stands beside its cornerstone. Still, necessary, and older than the argument. Gerald's knees had developed a visible wobble. He gripped the edge of the podium for support, his knuckles white against the dark wood. "I'm not going to yell at you," Carter said. "I'm not going to threaten you. I'm not going to make a scene." He glanced around the room. "I think the scene has already been made." A few people at nearby tables looked down at their plates. Ashamed. They'd watched the whole thing, the refusal, the redirect, the casual couple being seated, and they'd done nothing. That realization was settling over them now like dust after a building collapse, getting into everything, impossible to brush away. "Don't apologize to me, Gerald," Carter said. His voice dropped another register. Soft, almost gentle, which made it worse. "Apologize to every person who walked through that door and got the same treatment we got tonight, but didn't have a Forbes editor sitting at table 7 to catch it." Vivian raised her glass, barely, a millimeter, an acknowledgement. "Apologize to the ones who left quietly," Carter continued. "The ones who drove home and sat in their cars for 10 minutes before they could talk about it. The ones who never came back. The ones who told their kids that some places just aren't for people like us. Apologize to them, because I don't need your apology. But they deserved one, and they never got it." Gerald's mouth moved. No sound came out. He looked like a man standing on a trap door waiting for the click. Shelby stood near the kitchen, hands at her sides, tears running down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them. She didn't move. She just stood there and witnessed, the way someone witnesses something they've been waiting a long time to see. The piano player's hands came down on the keys, a single chord, soft, almost involuntary, as if even the instrument felt the weight of the room and had to respond. Then silence again. Carter took Nora's hand. He picked up the sweetgrass basket, and he turned toward the door. They didn't look back. The first video hit Twitter at 9:47 p.m. It was shaky, shot from a phone held at hip level by a woman at table 3 who'd been recording since Wallace Burke stood up. The angle caught Gerald's face in profile, the crumbling smile, the white-knuckle grip on the podium, the visible moment his legs decided they didn't want to hold him anymore. The caption read, "Restaurant manager denied a black couple service. Turns out the man owns the building. #LaValmont racism." By 10:15, the video had 12,000 views. By 10:30, it had 80,000. By midnight, it had crossed 2 million, and the #LaValmont racism was trending in 7 states. A second video appeared, this one clearer, shot from the bar by a graduate student who'd angled his phone against a cocktail glass for stability. It captured Carter's full speech, every word, the building revelation, the foundation, the apologize to them line, the walk to the door, the moment Carter and Nora stepped out into the warm Charleston night without looking back. That video went further. It crossed platforms. Twitter to TikTok to Instagram to Facebook to Reddit to group chats that would still be discussing it 3 weeks later. Someone set the apologize to them clip to music. Someone else turned Carter's silhouette in the doorway into a meme template. The internet did what the internet does. It took a moment and made it permanent. Comment sections erupted. The discourse was immediate, loud, and relentless. "This man owns the building and they still tried to turn him away. The disrespect is astronomical. Imagine how many people got that same treatment and just left." Carter Thompson is class personified. I could never stay that calm. Gerald Whitmore needs to never work in hospitality again, or anywhere with a door. Vivian Ashford didn't sleep that night. She sat in her hotel room at the Belmond with her laptop open, 2 cups of black coffee gone cold on the nightstand, and wrote until 4 a.m. She filed the draft at 5. Her editor had it live on Forbes.com by 6:30 that morning. The headline, "Billionaire Philanthropist Denied Service at His Own Property. What happened next exposes a deeper problem." It wasn't just a story about Carter. Vivian widened the lens. She interviewed 3 former Le Valmont employees before noon, all of whom confirmed that Gerald's behavior wasn't an anomaly. It was policy, unwritten, unspoken, but universally understood by every person who'd ever worn the Le Valmont apron. Certain guests were redirected. Certain reservations were lost. Certain people were made to feel that Le Valmont was not their kind of place. The pattern wasn't hidden. It was hiding in plain sight. It had been hiding there for years. By Sunday afternoon, the story had been picked up by CNN, The Washington Post, NBC News, and The Guardian. Local Charleston News ran it as their lead segment. A clip of Carter's speech played on a loop across cable news. The words, "apologize to them," becoming a kind of rallying cry that transcended the restaurant and touched something deeper, something a lot of people recognized from their own lives. Antoine Marchetti, the owner of Le Valmont, a third-generation restaurateur who spent most of his time at his vineyard in Napa Valley, called Carter's office Sunday morning. His assistant patched the call through to Carter's cell. "Mr. Thompson, I want to express my deepest, sincerest apologies," Marchetti said. His accent, half French, half Northern California, strained under the weight of a crisis he hadn't seen coming. "Gerald Whitmore has been terminated effective immediately. His behavior does not reflect the values of Le Valmont, and I am personally committed to—" "Gerald is your employee," Carter said. "He represents your brand. He stood at your podium wearing your name on his lapel, carrying out practices that, according to 3 of your former staff members, have been going on for years." A pause, long enough to fill with everything that didn't need to be said. "That doesn't sound like one bad apple, Antoine. That sounds like a barrel." Marchetti went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone realizes the prepared statement in front of them is useless. "I'm not interested in a phone call," Carter continued. "I'm interested in what you do next." What Marchetti did next wasn't enough. He issued a public statement. He hired a diversity consultant. He offered a donation to the NAACP. All of it arrived with the dull thud of a man doing the minimum and hoping the storm would pass. It didn't pass, because Shelby had already gone public. On Monday morning, Shelby posted a 7-minute video on TikTok. She sat in her car in the Le Valmont parking lot, the same lot where she'd parked for 11 months. The same lot where she'd eaten lunch in her front seat because the break room made her claustrophobic. And she talked. No script, no filter, no makeup. Just a 23-year-old waitress who'd finally had enough. She talked about the redirect system, about the code words Gerald used. Ambiance check, capacity hold, soft no. About the time a black family with a confirmed reservation was told their table had been double booked and offered a gift card as consolation. About the time an elderly black man in a 3-piece suit was asked to pay his bill up front before being seated, as if his presence was a debt the restaurant needed collateral for. "I should have said something sooner," Shelby said, her voice cracking at the edges like thin ice. "I knew it was wrong. I knew it every single time. But I needed the job, and I told myself that staying quiet was just surviving. I don't want to survive like that anymore." The video got 9 million views in 48 hours. 3 more current employees came forward. Then 2 former managers. Each one confirmed the pattern. Each one added a layer. The picture that emerged wasn't a portrait of one racist manager. It was an X-ray of a system, built on nods and glances and the quiet understanding that some people would always be worth less than others in the eyes of a mahogany podium. Marchetti's business partners began pulling out. A private event company canceled a 6-figure holiday contract. A premium wine distributor severed ties. The Charleston Tourism Board quietly removed Le Valmont from its recommended dining guide without issuing a statement, which was, in its own way, a statement. The walls were closing in, and Carter Thompson hadn't lifted a finger. He didn't need to. He'd done the one thing that mattered most. He'd told the truth, in a room full of people, with the lights on. And the truth, once loose, did what it always does. It kept moving. 3 weeks after the night at Le Valmont, Carter Thompson sat in a booth at a diner in downtown Charleston. Not a restaurant with linen napkins and a podium. A diner. Vinyl seats, laminated menus, coffee that came in a ceramic mug with a chip on the rim. The kind of place where the waitress calls you hun and means it. Across from him sat Shelby. She looked different than she had that night at Le Valmont. She looked lighter, like someone who'd set down a bag they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten it had weight. "I want to ask you something," Carter said, "and I want you to answer honestly. Not what you think I want to hear, not what sounds impressive. The truth." Shelby wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "Okay. If you could do anything at all, what would you do?" She didn't hesitate, not even a breath. "I'd open a restaurant." Carter leaned back. "Tell me about it." And she did. She talked for 20 minutes straight about the restaurant she'd been designing in her head since she was 16, when her grandmother taught her to make gumbo in a kitchen so small you couldn't open the oven and the fridge at the same time. About the menu, Southern comfort food with a modern edge, local ingredients, seasonal rotations, dishes named after the women in her family who'd never gotten credit for the recipes they'd perfected over generations. About the atmosphere, warm, welcoming, the kind of place where every person who walked through the door felt like they'd been expected. No podium, no dress code, no gatekeepers. "I even have a name," she said. "Louise's." Carter went still. "Louise? It was my grandmother's name. She's the reason I cook. She's the reason I do anything." Carter smiled. A real smile, the kind that starts somewhere deep and takes its time reaching the surface. His mother's name had been Louise, too. He didn't say that. Some things you keep because sharing them would dilute them. "Here's what I want to offer you," Carter said. "The Thompson Foundation has a full scholarship at the Culinary Institute of America. 2 years. Tuition, room, board, books, supplies, everything covered. When you graduate, we'll talk about what comes next." Shelby stared at him. Her mouth moved, but nothing came out. Her eyes filled. She pressed her palms flat on the table like she needed to make sure it was real, that the table was solid, that the diner was solid, that the man sitting across from her was solid, and not something she'd dreamed up during a double shift. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you brought us water," Carter said. "When nobody else moved, you moved. That tells me who you are. The rest is just training," Shelby cried. Right there in the booth, face in her hands, shoulders shaking. The waitress came over, saw what was happening, left a stack of napkins on the table, and backed away without a word. Some moments don't need interrupting. Meanwhile, the Le Valmont story continued its slow, grinding work. Marchetti tried everything. A redesigned website. A public apology video that felt like it had been written by a legal team, because it had. A promise to donate 10% of revenue to civil rights organizations. But the internet has a long memory and a short patience for performances that smell like panic dressed in good intentions. The lease on 114 King Street, the historic building that housed Le Valmont, was set to expire in November. Carter's property management team sent a standard notice. The lease would not be renewed. No dramatic announcement, no press conference, just a letter, certified mail, 2 paragraphs, clean and final as a period at the end of a sentence. Marchetti called Carter's office 17 times in 1 week. Carter's assistant took polite, detailed messages. Carter didn't return a single one. By October, Le Valmont served its last dinner. The staff had already scattered. Most of them had found other positions weeks earlier, aided by a quiet network of Charleston restaurant owners who'd reached out after Shelby's video. Wallace Burke hired 2 of them himself. He told a reporter it was the easiest hiring decision he'd ever made. The building at 114 King Street sat empty for exactly 31 days. On the 32nd day, construction crews arrived. They stripped the mahogany podium out first. That was Shelby's idea. She'd asked Carter if she could be there when they removed it. He said yes. She watched two men carry it out the front door and load it into a truck headed for a salvage yard. She didn't say anything. She just stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed and watched it go, the way you watch the last piece of something old make room for something new. The renovation took 4 months. The crystal chandeliers came down. The white tablecloths were donated to a women's shelter on the other side of town. The wrought iron balcony stayed. It was part of the building's history, and Carter believed in keeping history visible, even the uncomfortable parts, especially the uncomfortable parts. In their place, an open kitchen with industrial steel counters, a teaching lab with 12 stations, a community dining room with long wooden tables designed for sharing, a reading corner stocked with cookbooks donated by chefs from across the country, their spines already cracking from use before the doors officially opened. The sign above the door read, Thompson Community Kitchen. Below it, in smaller letters, where every seat is your seat. The grand opening was on a Saturday in March. The same kind of warm Charleston evening that had brought Carter and Nora to King Street a year earlier. The air carried the same jasmine, the same jazz from 2 blocks over. But the building wore a different face now. Shelby spoke first. She stood at a podium, a simple wooden lectern, nothing like the mahogany fortress Gerald had once commanded, and addressed a crowd of 200 people gathered on the sidewalk and spilling into the street. "A year ago, I worked in this building," she said. "I served bread and kept my mouth shut and told myself that silence was survival. I was wrong." She paused, looked out over the faces. "Survival isn't silence. Survival is this, all of you, standing here, in a building that used to keep people out and now exists to bring them in." Nora sat in the front row. She was crying. She didn't try to hide it. Carter stood in the back corner, arms folded, leaning against a wall that now belonged to something better than it had before. He wasn't smiling. He was doing something quieter than smiling, something that lives in the chest and doesn't need a name. Gerald Whitmore, according to a single line buried in a Charleston Post and Courier follow-up piece, had relocated to a suburb outside Tampa. He hadn't worked in hospitality since. No one had called. 2 years later, the Thompson Community Kitchen had graduated 214 students. 80% found employment within 3 months. Some went to established restaurants across the Southeast. Some started catering businesses out of their homes. A few landed positions at hotels and resorts that 2 years earlier wouldn't have looked twice at their resumes. 12 of them opened their own restaurants. Shelby was one of the 12. She graduated from the Culinary Institute of America in the top 5% of her class. Her final thesis, a farm-to-table concept rooted in Gullah Geechee cooking traditions, earned the highest marks her advisor had given in 11 years. She came back to Charleston, found a space on a quiet street 4 blocks from King Street, close enough to remember, far enough to breathe. The restaurant was called Louise's. It opened on a rainy Thursday in October. No grand ceremony, no ribbon cutting, just Shelby in a white chef's coat, standing in the doorway of her own place, watching the first customers walk in. A family of 4, a couple on their first date. An elderly man in a 3-piece suit who sat at the counter and ordered the gumbo without looking at the menu because someone had told him it tasted exactly like the kind his mother used to make. There was no podium at Louise's. There was a chalkboard by the door that read in Shelby's handwriting, "Welcome home. Sit anywhere." Carter and Nora drove down from Atlanta for the opening. They didn't announce themselves. They walked in, sat at a corner table, and ordered the tasting menu. Nora had the shrimp and grits. Carter had the red rice and braised short rib. They shared a slice of sweet potato pie that Shelby brought to the table herself. "How is it?" Shelby asked. Carter looked at her, looked at the room, looked at the full tables and the open kitchen and the chalkboard by the door. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said. Shelby pressed her lips together, nodded, walked back to the kitchen before the tears could catch up. Every year after that, Carter and Nora returned to Charleston for their anniversary. They didn't go to King Street, they went to Louise's. Same corner table, same tasting menu, same sweet potato pie. The Thompson Community Kitchen, meanwhile, became a model. Wallace Burke partnered with the foundation to open satellite programs in Savannah, Atlanta, and Birmingham. Each one carried the same principle: train people who've been overlooked, fund people who've been underestimated, and build doors where walls used to be. Carter gave an interview to The Atlantic 18 months after the incident. The reporter asked him what he wanted people to take away from the story. Carter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dignity was never about the table. It was about who we choose to be when someone tries to take it from us. Nora and I didn't walk into that restaurant to prove anything, but when we walked out, we left proof." The reporter asked what he meant. "Proof that the way you treat people when you think nobody's watching, that's who you are. And proof that sometimes somebody is watching." Nora, asked the same question in a separate interview, gave a shorter answer. "We didn't walk in to prove anything, but when we walked out, we left proof." The reporter noted her answer was almost identical to her husband's. Nora smiled. 27 years of marriage. You start finishing each other's truths. The building at 114 King Street still stands. The wrought iron balcony is still there, wisteria climbing its rails every spring. But the sign above the door tells a different story now. The story of a man who was told there were no tables, and who turned that moment into 200 seats that would never turn anyone away. If you walk inside on any given Tuesday evening, you'll find the teaching lab full. Students in white aprons, chopping onions, tempering chocolate, learning to plate a dish the way Shelby teaches, with care, with intention, with the understanding that food is how strangers become guests, and guests become family. On the wall near the entrance, there's a framed photograph, black and white. A woman named Louise Thompson, standing in a kitchen in Southwest Atlanta, 1978. Third grade teacher, single mother, apron stained with flour, smiling at the camera like she already knew. Next to it, a second photograph, another Louise, Shelby's grandmother, standing in a different kitchen, a different city, a different decade. Same flour, same smile, same knowing look. Two women who never met, hanging side by side on a wall in a building that exists because their names meant something to the people who loved them. Now I want to ask you something, and I mean this. Have you ever been judged before anyone knew your name? Ever walked into a room and felt the temperature change? Not because of the weather, but because of you. Drop your story in the comments. Every single one. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how we decide who belongs, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. Stories about people who refused to shrink, who turned closed doors into open ones, who sat on the bench and waited because they knew the truth would walk itself into the room.
214 graduates, 12 new restaurants, a drug mart that reads "Welcome home, sit anywhere," all from one bench and one refusal to leave. Girard's power lived in silence, the silence of guests who looked away, employees who swallowed their words, and families who drove home and couldn't speak for 10 minutes. That silence was the system. It ran for years, and it took exactly one man sitting still on a bench to collapse the whole thing. Carter didn't yell, didn't threaten. He just stayed and let the truth walk itself into a room. That's the thing about dignity. You can't give it. You can't take it. You can only show people what it looks like when someone refuses to let go of theirs. But here's what keeps me up at night. How many Carters walked through the door and left? How many empty tables were really full of people someone decided didn't deserve to sit down? And the harder question, when the room went quiet, would you have been the one to stand up or the one staring at your plate? drop the story in the comments. Every single one matters. If it hit you, share it with someone who needs it tonight. Subscribe. We tell stories every week about people who refused to shrink.